Hello, everyone. Welcome to a webinar hosted by the APHSA, American Public Human Services Association, in partnership with Northwoods. Today's webinar topic is Placer County, Implementing and Maintaining a System of Care. Next slide, please. My name is Alex Claremont, and I'm a senior content writer here at APHSA. I would like to take a moment to share with everyone an overview of APHSA and the work we do, what we do, who we do it for, and with our members. APHSA is a membership organization that represents state and local human services agencies from across the country through top-level leadership. Next slide. We have to deliver for our members through three core channels: influencing modern policies and practices with the goal of strengthening communities, building capacity through our conferences, technical expertise, publications, and OE consulting practice, and connecting members across a wide circle of stakeholders in the human services sector and with key partners. Next slide, please. On behalf of APHSA, I want to thank our panelists for their contributions. I also like to thank those in attendance. I want to remind you to register for, pardon me, I want to remind you this webinar will be shared in the days ahead. Look out for that email and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I'm going to pass it over to the moderator, Laura Hatfield.
Thank you, Alex. Sorry for cutting you off there. And welcome, everybody. We are excited to have this conversation and share the experience of Placer County for us all to learn a little something from. And we're very excited as part of Northwoods to be able to highlight this story and help them tell the story of how they have implemented and maintained their system of care over 3 decades, almost 35 years. So we're going to get right into it. I have a wonderful panel of great folks who have been a part of this journey over the years. I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. I'm going to start myself. I'm Laura Hatfield. I work for Northwoods. I'm their director of advocacy, and part of that is to tell good stories that we can all learn from and lift up some best practices that we see from our seat at Northwoods. I first met Placer County when they decided to implement one of our products, Traverse, to use that to support their operations, and learned very quickly how unique their version of service delivery is. And I've been talking about them ever since. So I'm very excited that they are able to join us and speak for themselves and tell their own story. So Colleen Nichols, if you could start, Judge Nichols, that would be great, in introducing yourself.
Great. Well, good morning from California. I know some of you are in the afternoon. My name is Colleen Nichols, and I'm the presiding judge of our juvenile court here in Placer County. I have been the juvenile presiding judge for just about 19 years, and on the court for will be 30 years in January. I have been attending our collaborative SMART policy meetings for over 27 years. So I think I'm the resident historian.
Thank you. And Twyla?
Good morning as well, and good afternoon for some of you. I'm Twyla Abrahamson, and I'm the director of the Children's System of Care. However, I really don't feel like I'm necessarily the director. I do this with all these wonderful people here. I have been with Placer County for almost 17 years. And prior to that, I was with another county, which we shall not mention because they're not organized the same way we are. But it was a lovely county, just not organized in this manner. And I also have spent a lot of years with a private nonprofit behavioral health organization. So while I bring about 34 years to this journey here, 17 years here in Placer. Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, of course. And Philip?
Good morning, Deputy County Superintendent for Placer County. I represent the county office who supports 16 LEAs within our county. We have 16 sovereign districts supported by the county office. I have been a part of the system of care for coming up on 30 years, early from instructional aide all the way up to an administrator within the county office.
Great. And Marshall?
Well, good morning. Marshall Hopper, Placer County Chief Probation Officer. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel. I really appreciate it. I've been involved in the field of probation for 32 years, the last 13 years as the chief probation officer here in Placer County. I've been directly involved in the SMART policy process as the assistant chief and the chief, so roughly 15 years or so. So I'm probably the second ranking person on this panel as far as being around. So I appreciate the opportunity and to share some of the experiences that we've learned over the years.
Thank you. Not that we're counting, right? Indira.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Indira Infante, and I am the program manager for our family advocate, parent advocate team here. We're co-located in the Children's System of Care. I'm an embedded partner working for Cal Voices, and I'm here with my lived experience as a parent who's accessed services for her children. I'm also bilingual bicultural. I've been here in the Children's System of Care over 12 years, and super excited and just thrilled to be a part of this wonderful collaboration. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. And lastly, but definitely not least, Lindsay, please share about you and where you come from.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Alderetti. I'm the program manager for the Youth Empowerment Support Program. And I've been involved with Placer County professionally for 13 years, but I also have my own lived experience of accessing services both as a minor and then also again as a parent. So also excited to be here and share our story.
Well, thank you all so much for bringing your perspectives, your lived experience. It's so important for this conversation. And we really, really appreciate you being willing to share that and have that. So just a little kind of baseline for everyone, because we've got folks joining the webinar from all over the country who may not know about Placer County, but we wanted just to share a little bit that Placer is a mid-sized California county. California is one of our county administered states for public services. And one of the biggest issues that they face, like many probably joining the call today, is housing. This is a county that was one of the first to implement a system of care. System of care came out historically from the mental health space. And then public services in about the 80s first kind of learned about it and started implementing it. And Placer was one of the first. They've been quickly growing as a county in terms of their population recently. And that I'm sure presents its own challenges for maintaining this system. So my first question that I'd love to get to, and Judge Nichols, I'll look to you to kind of start us off here. And I think we said during the introductions that you've been around the system of care the longest. Congratulations. And wow, the tenure on this call, if we add it all up, is over 100 years for sure, maybe close to 2. But I'd love to get your perspective of back in the beginning. Why did Placer County decide to go down a journey? All change is difficult, especially in human services, what is always complex and complicated to affect change. So why do something hard and take this kind of change on? I'd love for you to share.
Well, as I said, I started, coming to meetings in the late 90s. However, my predecessor, Judge Richard Cousins, was really the driver of this collaboration. And I want to talk a little bit about how that started. And one is, for everyone on the call, they understand that our families do not arrive at our agency doors all in a neat package. They frequently have a whole series of needs, not only for a particular youth, but maybe through the whole family, whether it's substance abuse, mental health, housing, domestic violence, school-related issues. All, we have to look at the family as a whole and not just each individual child, because sometimes our kids come in through the juvenile justice system. Sometimes the child or families come in through the child welfare case. Some come in through the mental health. Some come through school. So we're mindful of the level of need and the services and the cross need. And historically, all of our counties and agencies have been in these silos, and the families would have to go, to each particular agency to get services. How it really happened in Placer County is that Judge Cousins was frustrated because there was a couple particular youth in the juvenile justice system where probation was indicating they couldn't provide all the services. Mental health was saying, well, it's not their family, their child, so they can't do it. Child welfare likewise was saying, well, not their child, not their family, they couldn't do it. And essentially he got mad and he said, this is nonsense. This is not your child or your child. It's our children, our families, and we are collectively responsible for providing services to that family. So he called a meeting, mini meeting, and as is important is you have to have a convener, somebody who calls the meeting, and having, you know, all of you don't know Judge Cousins, I still keep in contact with him regularly. He's a strong character, so when he sent out a notice, everyone showed up. And at that meeting, at that point, was the director of mental health, the chief probation officer, and the director of child welfare. Subsequently, we now have a health and human services and mental health, child welfare, and adult system of care all within the same agency, but that was different at that time. There was tough negotiations and discussions about how these agencies were going to work together. While we have our first MOU that was signed in 1988, the process started in, I believe, 1986, 1987, and I don't have the exact date, and he couldn't remember either. But it did take a lot of negotiation to get to that point, to really focus on, you know, really making the commitment from each agency, not only to work together, but most importantly, to work for the needs of children and families collectively and not individually in those individual silos. They ultimately all committed to the process, to the discussions, to reaching that MOU. I have a copy of the MOU here, and so I think it's always important to understand what those initial discussions were. So part of it reads that the SMART policy team was not created to solve a routine departmental problem, but referrals will be made for children with complex personal, family, or social problems that cannot be serviced within one agency. And it also talks about where there are problems where the solution to problems, again, is beyond the scope of that agency and requires a multidisciplinary consideration. And that's really how that started. I think the other major issue, and took a lot of negotiation, and you know, we'll talk about, Twyla will probably talk about some other barriers, is they developed a motto, which is that we put our money and resources on the table and our hands behind our back, so that we could collectively share those resources without anybody saying, well, that's mine, or I don't do that, etc. Now, the meetings for the first 15 plus years were every Wednesday morning at 7:30 in the morning. That included the director of health and human services, the director of the children's system of care, so the next step down, the assistant superintendent of education was added later, not initially, so that was probably about 5 years later. Also including those meetings was the chief probation officer and the presiding judge of the juvenile court, who has always been the chair of the SMART policy team. We met every morning. In about 2000 and early 2000s, we moved to meeting twice a month at 7:30 in the morning, and we continue to do that to this day. In fact, we had a meeting this morning at 7:30. At that policy level, we really try to circumvent problems, but there's some key things. One is you have to develop relationships, and as you can see, we have lots of people who have been here for a long time. Those relationships are critical because they build trust, and that is how we can operate today. The other barriers are financial barriers, that where legislation prevented us and the agencies from sharing resources. We've been able to legislatively get around that. Again, I'm not the person to talk about that. And then a major barrier, especially at the beginning, actually, was to get each agency staff on board to working across lines, and to understanding that the department chairs were all in full support. And that required frequently, I would have to go to big training sessions and give the speech of, this is what we're doing. We've made this collective decision. We are working together to support children and families together. Now, Twyla would never let me say this, or she could never say it, but this was my motto to staff when they were kind of not wanting to do the cross collaboration, which was, and I'm going to use a quote that I stole from somebody else, which is, we will carry the sick and wounded, but the stragglers will be shot. So in other words, if staff who were in these agencies really weren't working towards this collective goal, they essentially got isolated or, moved on within the agency to a job that was more appropriate for them. And that's the nicest way I can say that. So it has been a work in progress. We have struggled at times. Transitions are always challenging, and we've had some agency transitions that were more difficult than others, but we've overcome them recently. We are in the middle of succession planning right now as I'm retiring next year after a long stint. Again, it has been a process, and it does require care and feeding. It requires regular meetings. It requires that the directors communicate to their respective staff and their cross-assigned staff the commitment, the institutional commitment of each agency to this collaboration. It requires a third party, and that's why the judge is the chair, because we don't have the same financial indication. We're just, all these agencies, the children and family come to the court frequently. So with that, I will turn it over. I think Twyla, are you next?
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question, Judge Nichols. You'd mentioned some of the kind of nuts and bolts of getting started. You had these regular meetings. It started with a few groups. Anything else you would add about those early days of getting things going? You talked about facing resistance from potentially employees of these different groups. Anything else you wanted to add at all necessarily about kind of those early days and the nuts and bolts of like really getting it going and implementing it across all these different various systems?
I think the other part that was very critical is working with our Board of Supervisors, which is the elected officials in our county, to have them recognize that this collaborative system is the best way to develop policy for services to be provided for children and families. Sometimes I honestly forget that we have, because it's been so institutionalized, that our Board of Supervisors has essentially delegated to the Smart Policy team the policy for and development of services for children and families to our agency, as opposed at the county office, county level. And they've been pretty hands-off for a long time. I should about that. I think then the other issue that we've come across press recently, and I think probably throughout the nation we've had a lot of personnel changes, and to make sure that we were providing the training to all of our personnel within each of the agencies about how important this work is, how committed we are as a county to providing services collectively, right? So the family doesn't have to say, oh, I have to do services through probation, and then I have to do them through at the school, and then I have to, work with my social worker and child welfare. It's all delivered together. We have one plan for the family, and they don't have to go to different agencies to get their services. Probation can access the same services that the child welfare department can, or that the education within the services that are here, assigned to SMART. Yeah, it can be all done through one plan, and they don't have to bounce from agency to agency.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that context of why you went down that journey. And it sometimes does have to start with someone just getting frustrated and like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And I love that piece about put your money on the table and your hands behind your back, because that is coming to the table earnestly and genuinely to work collectively. So that tees us up really well, Twyla, to share a little bit about how does your system of care function today? what are some of the aspects of it that are unique? How does your system differ from other ways of delivering these services in a more separate manner? If you could share a little bit about that, that would be great for us to learn how things are going today.
So I've always said this, though, one of the great things about going after Judge Nichols is that I can also fill in around the edges. And one of the things that she mentioned early on that allowed us to be organized this way is our waiver. We had a waiver with the Welfare and Institutions Code that actually allowed us to be organized in this way. And we have this visually represented. And of course, this has changed a little bit over time, but we now have that sunsetted, and that is actually permanent language in the Welfare and Institutions Code. If you actually look up Placer County, you can see it allows us to be organized in a way to share information, in a way to share treatment planning, in a way to share funding, and all of those sort of things. So we still have that. That's wonderful that it's now in permanent language, but we are organized a little differently than other counties. One of the first things that you'll notice, this is visually represented here, of course, but we have a lot of different elements and we all consider them our equal partners, right? Our equal partners in all of this. A little different than other counties is the fact that, speaking personally, I wear the child welfare services and behavioral health services hat. So for children's, we're organized in a system of care that I wear both of those. And so over those budgets and over those folks. So not only are we co-located in that manner, well, in addition to that, we have other people here too. So our foster care nursing and our wonderful educational foster youth services partners, they are here as well. And we're just a floor away from our probation officers. And we have, the county I worked in before, we couldn't allow all these other people to be here if they were non-county employees. And we have all of these folks. We have some of our family resource centers, our partners are here. And as you'll hear a little bit later, both Indira and Lindsay's teams are here as well. So that's one just really different things about us. And you heard from Judge Nichols, we are organized with our SMART policy board. We have a working arm that's underneath our policy board, so which we call SPEAK. And what SPEAK does is when we have a policy issue to work on or whatnot, we have some folks that are all represented here, but maybe at one level down because we're doing more of the actual work. And then we work on some of these tough issues too. So if we needed to modify the MOU or if we need to have a different policy in place. So we really do this integration, as we've said, and the waiver allowed us to do it before, but really it was Judge Cousins and then Judge Nichols and everybody else who sort of forced it, right? And we continue it because it's part of our mission and vision. So some of the system of care values that we have, you saw on, and you'll see it again, you'll see our mission and vision a couple of times in these slides because it's very, very important. But really the strength of our system lies in our trauma-informed multidisciplinary approach to our case management and our service delivery. We tried in the early days to actually have what we were called transdisciplinary workers. So we had somebody who would have a child welfare caseload and a behavioral health caseload together. We didn't ever try to then say, and you can be their probation officer as well. But hey, if we could have tried it, we would have. We found that, well, that is a little confusing. And I also often say that all of our system members need to be multilingual, right? So we expect our social workers and our clinicians and our probation officers and our educational workers, we expect them to know quite a lot about all the other systems. We expect them to know that. And if they don't know that when they first come here, we expect them to learn that, but we don't expect them to be the expert in it. So we basically try to develop and demonstrate that cross-functional proficiency in all these areas. All areas of family preservation, mental health, probation, as I said, child protective services, special and alternative education, sexual abuse treatment, public health, substance abuse, diversion, all of these things. This integrated core model is a really busy slide, but let me talk to you about it a little bit as we go along. But we do use that multidisciplinary approach. We have child and family team meetings all the time, more than are required. And again, I know there's a lot of folks here that are from different states. In California, we're required to do certain numbers of child and family teams at different places in a particular case with families, but we do them a lot more. And then I'm sure Lindsay and Indira, when they talk a little bit more about this, it's all surrounded by the family and who the family wants on those child and family team meetings too. I know we also mentioned collaboration, and you're going to hear us talk about collaboration, close collaboration, and that trust element. And one other thing that we also want to talk about, which are the slide before mentioned a few of the system of care elements, but part of that is that shared responsibility as well. This is why we all have each other's cell phone numbers. It's why we also know when people call, we have determined and promised each other that we will all pick up at all times so that we can do that. But back to this particular slide, you'll see on the left, we have our mission and vision here, which we all believe in. But in order to have a really good integrated system of care, you have to have a shared mission and vision. We can't determine that one system element is more important than another. Maybe a particular family has more of an issue in a particular area, and so we can bring more resources to bear, but you really have to have that shared mission and vision together. And we talked about co-location. We talk about that a lot. Boy, did the pandemic ever put a stress on that. And I know if we can talk about that a little bit later, but co-location is pretty important so that people can see each other face to face. And I know virtual helps, it does, and when we need to be different places, and it's been a great addition to our toolbox, but we do still need to have those really collaborative one-on-one relationships and in our group settings so that we can see each other and we can continue to emphasize what our mission and vision is and what our values are. Colleen also mentioned that we need to, we have our meetings, we have them frequently, but if we don't share those same values, then we won't be going towards each other, you know, in a very consistent way. And with turnover that we've had, that's been a very difficult thing too. So we could get to a whole training aspect and probably talk about that on an entirely different webinar. But what we're looking for though, really, is functional change at the direct service level. So we have to have our staff on board. We have to have our clinicians, our educational partners. We have to have our social workers, our probation officers, our family and youth that serve us as advocates. We have to have everybody marching in the same direction. Otherwise, we just have pure chaos, and then we're not helping the family get the help that they need. So some of our challenges in that area, and you can see some of these, again, on this slide, there's a lot of different elements here. But some of the challenges we have is with that siloed funding, but having a system of care allows us to then say, oh, well, you are losing that particular funding stream. Maybe we have a different funding stream that can help support it. Or I remember in the financial cliff that we had over in the 08, 09, when we lost certain funding in different places, we came together as a group to say, what do we need to support? What are our core services that we need to do? And that is one of the benefits clearly of having a system of care. So that's how some of it works today. We apply for grants together. We are really pretty successful in that. And then also if our community, and we just put some of our providers up here, these are some of our community providers, and you can see they have faith-based organizations, culturally supported service providers. There's many that aren't on here, right? There's our First 5 Placer. We have our Resilient Placer. We have a Placer Ready committee, which is race, equity, inclusion, diversity, and access, diversity, and inclusion. We have all of that together. We've had that committee, by the way, for the last 20 plus years, even before it became more of a forefront for us to all think about. But with all of our service providers here, what we are trying to do together is when we go for a grant or anything else, we can reach out to our community partners. And because we have meetings with them, yes, we emphasize meetings again. Our community partners, we actually have meetings with them every single month. And we have a leadership meeting. And our community partners then can also give us feedback in the system as the formal system folks. If there's any problems they're encountering, if there's any issues that they have, we want them to be involved in our policy development and give us feedback. And believe me, they do. And it makes us all just get better and stronger as we go together. So that's a bit about how we're actually functioning today. And of course, more changes as we go along. But I think I'll turn that back over to you, Laura.
You're muted, Laura.
Of course, it has to happen at least once, right? Thank you, Twyla. And I was going to say that if anyone has questions as we're talking about this, please do go to the Q&A part of Zoom and enter your question there. I think I had about 10 while you were talking, Twyla, but in the interest of time, I am going to move along and turn it over to Philip, who can share a little bit from the education perspective, how this functions for you, your students, your staff.
Sure, thanks. So you'll see on the slide that these are some of the services currently offered through the educational environment: foster youth services, school-based wellness centers, which is a newly adopted program through the Mental Health Services Act, improving school climate through positive behavioral intervention and supports. We run one of the largest conferences in the nation, and then independent living program for foster youth. Probably the best thing I can do is maybe describe my career through the system of care. My first teaching job was in a day treatment model, which was funded through an MOU facilitated by CSOC, our system of care, with our school districts and the county mental health department. That program was funded using educational dollars, which would then be reimbursed by dollars coming from the state for mental health services made eligible through the county mental health department. The partnership was actually codified in early 80s through Assembly Bill 3632 and then a section 26.5 that required county mental health to be the educational mental health service provider for educational institutions. We have 16 local education agencies within our county. They all signed on to an MOU to provide these deep end services in that day treatment model, in which is where I started my career. I then moved to an administrative position at one of the districts, and in the early 2000s, Governor Schwarzenegger eliminated that Assembly Bill section 3632 and 26.5, separating mental health services from the school districts, and then school districts were responsible for providing their own mental health services, which created a strain on the relationship of the county mental health department and the school districts. The regular meetings that Judge Nichols referred to allowed that relationship to continue, and we're actually quite thankful that the county mental health department and the other partners stuck with educational services during that time. It was a bit of a challenge when we can no longer rely directly on our partners at mental health and had to transition those services to school districts who may not have actually had the expertise to do that. We actually were able to survive that time, and significantly because of the collaborative nature we have within our county. Now you see the services that are currently being provided, and that's just a small portion of the services that are both fostered and supported through the system of care that the county office provides to support the districts within our county.
Okay, thank you for sharing that perspective. We're also going to turn it over for you, Marshall, to share from probation how this is functioning for you all from your service that you provide.
Great. Well, thank you. Once again, I'm Marshall Hopper, Chief Probation Officer. I'd like to just start off real quick with a couple comments. Judge Nichols mentioned stragglers could be shot. Well, back in the 90s, she might have been referring to us because probation officers, we're a different type of person. We got that law enforcement hat and that social worker hat, and sometimes our staff don't wear the hats well. But that's all changed, just given the time that we've been together. I think it's important to talk about, as Twyla mentioned, the integrated model and how the system works. I think if you can leave with one point from me to make this model work, before I go into some of the details, it's going to be that we have to trust each other and we have to remain focused on the shared vision, which is better families and kids in our community. It's that simple. Anytime because we don't always agree, but we work things out. And anytime we have discussions about things, if we can remain with the trust and the focus on the kids and families, we will get to positive outcomes and we'll get there together. And that's what I've learned over the last 15 or so years with Smart Policy, working with that and working with my probation officers in the different programs and services. And we've seen some really great progress. Just to kind of highlight some of the progress and some of the things that have changed over the years. Our juvenile detention facility has 78 beds. Roughly in 2000, I know some of us may recall back then that every Friday afternoon we had to do a list that went to the court because we were full and we were anticipating bookings to be coming into our facility. And we had to go, okay, which ones can we let out? If we get two got to go out the back door. And that process went on for quite some time. But over time, that thing started to change. And I think there are a couple significant things that happened roughly in 2000. That's when our facility opened. And coincidentally, that's when the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act came through. And we started working together and developing some more programs and services. One of those significant services from our group was the Crisis Resolution Center. Now, back before we had some of these programs, it was not uncommon for a kid to get booked into juvenile hall for vandalism because they broke their own door arguing with their parents. And some of the systems in place that we have now today, we don't have to do that. Because think about it from a law enforcement officer's perspective. You've got a family who's fighting, you've got a broken door. It's obviously not going to work if these kids and this family stay together over the night. So what the officers would do is they would bring them to juvenile hall on a vandalism charge, and we would be stuck with them. And now they've entered our justice system. Some needed to be there, some maybe not so much. But the Crisis Resolution Center helped change all that in our community. And what that system does, it's a 6-bed facility down in the town of Loomis. It's funded with combination through Health and Human Services funds, through CSOC, and through our probation funds, the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act. And it's really a partnership to do what? To keep those kids out of the hall. So moving forward today, if we were to have the same situation where there's an argument between the parents and someone slammed the door and it got broke, our law enforcement officers or probation officers or social workers or whoever could take these individuals to the Crisis Resolution Center and get some services and programming and counseling, and they are diverted basically from our justice system and they get reunited back with the families. And that's a win-win for everybody, because families stay together, kids stay with their parents, and we keep them out of the system until they need to be there, if they need to be there. This program has diverted hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of cases from coming into our justice system. And I think that's pretty significant. And I also have to add, just throwing my law enforcement hat back on, is the fact that it has a hotline. There's a hotline at the Crisis Resolution Center that takes calls 24 hours a day regarding families in distress, issues and concerns. So sometimes parents that are having a difficult time with teenagers, I have 2 in college, so I know what that's like now, and they call this line for help, and they can get direction, guidance, and kind of coaching on what to do. 20 years ago, they probably called the police department and asked for guidance and help. And that's how we ended up with a lot of those broken doors. But I think the significant part of that, going back to the law enforcement hat and the public safety regarding your community, is this call line receives anywhere between 3,000 and 4,000 phone calls a year. And those could have been and would have been calls to dispatch, calls to law enforcement. So if we can keep the cases that need to be handled at this level away from our law enforcement interventions, less kids in the system, more interventions for families, and then also we have more time for our law enforcement officers to be out on the street, protecting our communities, doing what they need to do, whether into dealing with arguments between teenage daughters and parents. That program has been a wonderful program for our community and continues to be so. Now, looking at just a couple other items I want to touch on, I think it's important to really talk about our juvenile drug court. a partnership with all of our folks. I know Judge Nichols near and close to her heart. She's been a key person involved in that program and helped it change over time. So we can really sit back and make changes with family. I will tell you, as a chief probation officer, I know drug courts have been around for a long time and they've been established fairly well. But if I want a taste of reality of what we do, I go to a drug court graduation, and it reminds us why we do what we do, and that is pretty significant. And I think that sort of the concept here regarding the drug court and working together with our partners at CSOC, I think that is a critical component to really just working together. I know back to our juvenile detention facility, we have a worker from Child System of Care working in there, a practitioner that's basically there full time. It has been for, I think, probably 20 years. We've had somebody at least now working in our facility. And it really does provide the services to the kids in the facility, to the parents, and to the staff, so we can provide the best possible services that we can. And it's really part of that collaborative relationship. And I think that some of our other programs that we've done, we have integrated our Northern California construction training program to individuals that are in our facility, sort of the educational component. We've also worked with Golden Sierra job training agencies to help get kids jobs when they get out. Our average length of stay in our juvenile hall is about 18 days. So most cases, we don't have a lot of time. But under some recent juvenile justice reform, we have kids much longer now. And as a result of that, we've also worked together with Office of Education, all of our partners, to develop a direct line to our local community colleges. And today we have 2 individuals that are currently attending college while incarcerated in our hall, which is a pretty phenomenal concept. And I think that a lot of those programs that we have really boil down to keeping the kids and families together. One other one that's really significant is our probation officers and our partnerships with the Roseville Police Athletic League and the Sheriff's Athletic League, getting out in the communities, doing early intervention programs, keeping kids out of the system. It's a win if we can keep the kid out of the system. And every year we celebrate together as a group how many kids we potentially, hopefully diverted out of the system. That's a hard number to count because we'll never actually really know, but I think that that's an important concept. And I really do think that the concept that we have here in the relationship, even though the 7:30 mornings or 7:30 meetings every other couple of weeks is rough sometimes, but we all get there, we all make it work. And I think that's the key foundation. So we got a lot of different things going on in probation. I could probably talk for a long time, but I really just want to emphasize the importance of communication, trust, and staying focused on the prize. And the prize is keeping kids and families together and having better communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall. I can hear the passion for sure. And thank you for those tangible examples. I think they really help frame the conversation and make it real for folks thinking about how this might work and look in their own communities. And I want to move on because I want to give a lot of time for our other speakers here because their voices are probably the most important of all. Sorry, everyone else has already spoken, but I know we have a judge here, but I'm going to say it. It's a bold claim. And we do have a few questions that have come in, and one of them is curious about your youth and family voice and where that's located within your system of care framework, which is a great segue into what we want to talk about next. And there are a few other questions we'll try to get to at the end too. But Twyla, maybe you can speak really briefly about when you realized in your partnership that a voice is missing, that some representation is missing. How do you alter the course and make sure to include that? How do you reach out to those groups and include them in moving forward and evolve your system over time?
So that is one of the great things that we wanted to talk about. And I'm glad that we had the questions in the chat too. We're getting there. We're almost there, you guys. So when we noticed that education was missing way back in like 1993, we were like, what were we thinking? And, again, I say the royal we, I wasn't here at the time. And we came to the table and said, we've got to get education involved and had those hard conversations and brought them in. In 2011, we were missing our parent voice, definitely missing our parent voice. And so we hired one of the first family advocates that worked in the system. And so, we've been doing this now then for, 12, 13, 14, I think it's even longer than that. It was probably earlier. And then obviously with our youth voice, and we're going to have both Indira and Lindsay speak, but the other people that we noticed just recently, and I'll just mention one piece of legislation. California did pass AB 2083, which they've recognized, the legislature recognized here in California, that systems should actually start to be organized in this manner. So a few years ago, they passed this piece of legislation that is requiring counties to at least have a formal MOU with certain system partners. We were missing a partner. We were missing our regional center, our developmental regional center. So we brought them in, and they're part of our SMART collaborative as well. And they just were not able to be here today because we've just got too many people, right, in the collaborative. But one of the things I did want to just say as we're segueing to when we needed to and recognize that we needed our family and youth voice, we also have family-centered practices, which they're going to talk about. But we do have, and we're organized, we used to have a multidisciplinary team that was for placement. It was called Placement Review Team. And we also at the same time realized this should be transitioned to a family-based collaborative. So we call it the Family Resource Community Collaborative when we have to deal with those really multidisciplinary and needs kids and families. And one of the things that we also did, because I don't know if Indira or Lindsay will mention it, is that we also wanted it to be facilitated by them. It should not be facilitated by a system person, which we did for many, many years, but it makes the families much, much more comfortable to have either somebody who's been in the system or has experience with the system with lived experience. So that's how we run our FRCC as well. So I'm going to turn this over, I think, to Indira and Lindsay.
Thank you, Twyla. I appreciate that. One of the things that I'm Indira Infante again. I forgot to introduce myself. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I actually access services. I have the double lived experience of being a youth in the system, the juvenile delinquency system, and also as a caregiver and parent as an adult. So when I hear all of this wonderful history, it just makes me really happy because I do see it on a daily basis working alongside our system partners. I'm a contract employee. I'm not a county employee, which I think it's been a really amazing blessing because I feel like I can highlight some of those gaps that I've seen through the years as well. And, having the ear of leadership to really, and the open mind of really focusing on building those meaningful partnerships with families. We say always here in the system of care that the families are experts, right? So although all these infrastructures are amazing, allowing families to have that voice, parents to be able to really be open about the things that they're struggling with is just such a wonderful thing. It does take time. Every family, we had a meeting this morning. This came up about all families come into the system with different needs, different stories, but really having folks without lived experience at the table alongside the parents. So everybody on my team has that lived experience as well, and I'll touch on that in just a couple minutes. But just culturally appropriate services and access to just the right services for that specific family. I'm going to actually let Lindsay step into this as well, because with the family centered practice, the parent voice is just as important as the youth voice, and then kind of combining those two together to be able to have positive outcomes is so essential to having really wonderful successes in our families and in the system. Lindsay, do you want to add anything?
So part of the beauty of our system of care and all the different partners that are involved is that we engage families in decision-making and really honor them, as Indira said, as the experts who know their families and their needs best. So they're consistently invited to the table, to the head of the table, actually, and we really want to see them as the ones who are taking the lead in any planning that's done regarding their family.
Yes. And also, one of the crucial pieces of it, and we also talked about that this morning in our SMART policy meeting, is really starting with the strengths of the family, and then working through all of the other needs and gaps and getting families to that stable place so they can actually move on through their case of reunification, or the youth can get through some of that juvenile delinquency. Some of the mental health families that we serve obviously have some very complex needs, and I'm super just thrilled that we do have family advocates on our team who have that true lived experience of accessing complex mental health services for their children. And so our family advocate team, as Twyla said, it's been here, over 12 years supporting parents. There's 13 positions now that provide that support for dependency, delinquency, behavioral health, and are also part of the mobile crisis teams that are going out with the clinicians to really meet families and youth where they're out in the community. As I mentioned earlier, and will continue to mention, everybody on our team has that lived experience. So we have very lived experience on our team. We have parents that really had to access some really high level services from the county. For example, having open child welfare cases, some complex mental health cases for their children, and also education as well. Some of our advocates also have that combination of accessing and navigating all systems as well. So it's really something really special and unique, I believe, to have us co-located and embedded here in the system, and sitting alongside all of our partners has been essential to doing the work like Twyla and others mentioned earlier. So I'll move on to the cultural broker piece. As I mentioned earlier, being bilingual and bicultural is so important. Having bilingual staff on our teams, which is on all of the teams here in Placer, is so important because we do have a high Latino population here in Placer County. So, working with our partners on the community, Sierra Native Alliance, Latino Leadership Council, to ensure that those cultural needs of the families are being really respected and held to that level of we are going to try to provide all services in their native language, and also ensuring that we are being respectful of their cultural needs.
Okay, so our youth peer support program is called the Youth Empowerment Support Program. And the nuts and bolts of the program were developed by and are currently carried out by peers, people with lived experience. We started back in 2007 with one single advocate. And now today our contract holds, I think, 11 positions, from direct support staff all the way to management level. We hire people with lived experience with mental health, probation, child welfare, all of that as a youth, so under the age of 18. And we use that experience to provide support to youth and young adults in dependency, delinquency, and behavioral health situations. We help them to engage in the services that they're receiving and learn how to appropriately advocate for themselves. I say the word appropriately because sometimes the advocacy can come out a little bit strong. So we often model that advocacy for young people so that then they're able to do that on their own. We also help youth to understand the process of whatever system that they're involved in, and really create space for the youth voice in their individual family meetings. And then also we as staff use the input in any system meetings as well. We support young people who come into contact with the mobile crisis teams. We connect them with any resources that can help them after a crisis intervention has taken place, to potentially prevent future need for crisis intervention. We also do trainings to child welfare workers, probation officers, community members, really on the topic of inclusion of youth voice, stigma reduction, and then also positive youth development. And we invite our young people to attend those trainings so that they're included and they see themselves as equals. And they're really valued and honored for the input that they provide. As Twyla mentioned before, we support system transformation by participating in all the different various leadership teams that impact the policies and practices that take place here in Placer. And I just wanted to emphasize really quickly, sorry, I know you moved on to the next slide, but you've heard many times that the relationships and the trust is what really works here, but it's really the crucial piece that makes this machine work well. We all have the same goal of better outcomes for youth and families. And how we get there might be different based on the lens that we all are looking through, or the role that each of us plays. But we're not afraid to ask questions or bring things up that are difficult to talk about. And it really is because of those relationships that we have the trust that what we share is going to be well received and not discounted for the positive outcomes for our youth and families.
Thank you, Lindsay. And that is a perfect way to transition to what we're going to talk about next. And I think, like you said, it's the key to this all actually working. It's the grease on the gears, is that trust between these very different groups that we've heard from today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have a little bit of a conversation with the last few minutes. And thank you, Twyla, for answering some of those questions in the chat. If we can get to those too, that's great. But I do really want to hear from whoever wants to add. And I think Judge Nichols wanted to chime in here first with any of the impacts that you have seen from transitioning to a model like this. If you have any specifics, and also how you maintain this model over time. Because I know from our conversation, that's one of the hardest pieces, is maintaining that trust as people move in and out of positions. And again, it's been 35 years that this thing has been going. So if you could speak on those, and anyone can chime in with whatever they wanted to add here in these last couple minutes we have together.
So I think first I wanted to talk about the institutionalization of our practice. And one of the things that we have all committed to is, as each individual leaders within our own agency, or in my case, the court, my job, besides my commitment to the smart policy team, is to make sure that my entire group of judges understand, and our administrative, like our, administrative staff at the court, understand how important this role is, and that the court's role as the chair of the smart policy team, how critical it is. For many counties, and this is true in California, where we're really pushing forward for all counties to be organized in a similar way, is you have to have a convener, somebody who is willing to call the meeting and hold everybody accountable. And frequently that's the court, right? We're the party that everybody comes to solve the problems if they can't solve them. And so the court becomes the convener. So I have that role within smart policy, but within our court itself is really advocating within my own court staff to, make sure that we get the resources for juvenile court that we need, that there's time, that there's a commitment for my time to be spent on these issues, not in court all day, every day, although that's pretty much what's happening right now. And then the second issue is really to talk about how I've seen benefits. And, I've been on the court almost 30 years, and we're a small court. We have 15 judicial officers, excuse me. And I've been able to kind of do all the assignments within our court because of that over this year. And I have seen families who have had multiple issues, right? So I have them in child welfare. One of the kids may have a juvenile justice issue. I have the parent in adult drug court. That's something I've done for a very long time. And I've seen how their success affects every member of the family. When we commit to provide them services collectively, and they're not bouncing from agency to agency, and how, mom's getting her substance issues under control and she's in recovery, and all of a sudden she can advocate for that one child who may have special needs in school. She can also make sure that kids are getting the counseling, that she's able to get a job, or the father is, and how it kind of all coalesces when they have a common goal and plan, and be delivered consistently, not going, oh, I've got to go to this agency and then that agency and then that agency, and there's cross purposes. So I think, just over the 27 plus years doing juvenile court in particular, just to see all of those cases and successes come together. Obviously, there's some that aren't successful, but we don't want to talk about it.
That's another webinar. Any other impacts? I know we only have a minute left, literally, but if there's any last impacts that anyone else in the group wanted to share that they felt the audience should know about.
I just wanted to comment briefly. I forgot to mention it on my portion of the presentation. I mentioned that juvenile hall being crowded in 2000. Population here lately has been roughly 20. instead of, maxed out. And I also think it's important to recognize keeping the kids and families together, that when we back in 2000, I recall, and I know Judge Nichols will remember this, having 50 kids in placement or something. The number was crazy that we were sending kids out of home placement all over the place. Some of those were out of state, and many of those were local group homes and those kinds of things. The number I got from my last report from last month is we had 0 probation kids in placement. And that really attributes to the commitment of this group and the relationships that we have. And I think that's pretty substantial.
Thanks, Marshall. Any last words from anyone in the group? Well, thank you, Twyla, for answering some of the questions in the chat. If any folks want to reach out to the panelists, I'm sure we can provide some contact information along with the slides. That was one of the questions that came in, is could we get a copy of the slides? But on behalf of everyone listening today, thank you so much for telling your story, sharing some of those hard things that you had to surmount to make this work and continue to have to maintain over time. On behalf of Northwoods, we're really excited to continue to support your county and live alongside you on this journey as you maintain this system. And we got some thank yous from the chat as well. So thank you very much for your voices, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you.
On behalf of APHSA, I want to thank all the panelists for the contributions. I also like to thank those in attendance. I want to remind you all this webinar will be shared via email in the days ahead. Look out for that email and have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye, everyone.